Hello, friends. We are very interested to know which cities you are listening to us from, so quickly like and write in the comments where you are from. Also share what shocking stories happened in your city or maybe even with you personally. Subscribe because the next story could be about your city or even your personal drama. Now let's dive into a new exciting story. The morning in Peter and Charlotte's house began like hundreds of others before, with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and soft light breaking through the curtains. Their small house in the Oklahoma suburbs was a typical American retreat: a white picket fence, a neatly trimmed lawn, a porch with two rocking chairs, which they bought at the crossroads of their dreams for the future. 3 years of marriage flew by quickly, and yet something subtly changed. Peter felt it in the air, but couldn't pinpoint the exact reason. He sat at the kitchen table, leafing through the morning newspaper, while Charlotte stood at the stove, stirring the oatmeal. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and her pink robe was loosened slightly, revealing a thin strip of skin at her waist. Peter glanced at her, and a warmth stirred in his chest. She was still the same woman he fell in love with at the Tulsa Fair. But the warmth quickly gave way to a slight pang of anxiety when he noticed how her shoulders tensed. "You got up early today," Charlotte said without turning around. Her voice was soft, but with a subtle hint of fatigue. "Yes, I decided not to lie around," Peter answered, folding the newspaper. "There's a new project at the construction site. You need to be in shape." "What, you didn't sleep half the night again?" She turned, holding the wooden spoon in her hand, and looked at him. Her blue eyes seemed a little duller than usual. "I was sleeping, but I don't know, my dreams are strange. I woke up all the time." "Again about children?" he asked carefully, trying not to step on mine. Charlotte froze, the spoon in her hand trembled. She turned to the stove, as if the answer was too heavy to say out loud. "No, not really," she finally said. "Just stuff." Peter nodded, even though he knew she was lying. Dreams about children have haunted her for several years now. He remembered how once, before the wedding, she sat on the sofa with a magazine for mothers and laughed, showing him a picture of a chubby baby in a pumpkin costume. "This is what I want, Peter. Just look at these cheeks." Then he laughed with her, imagining how their house would be filled with children's squeals. But the years passed, and the children's room remained empty, just another door in the hallway that they rarely opened. "The oatmeal is almost ready," Charlotte interrupted the silence, putting the pan on the table. "Would you like honey or cinnamon?" "Honey," he answered, pushing the bowl towards him. "Are you going to work today?" "Yes, shift from 10. Lisa will again whine that her new boss is a tyrant." "Until what time are you at the site?" "Until 5, if they don't detain. The new foreman is a young guy, but he has already annoyed everyone with his ideas. Yesterday, he forced us to shift the foundation because it seemed crooked to him." Charlotte smiled, but it was forced. She sat down opposite, pulling up her robe, and began to slowly stir her oatmeal. Peter looked at her, trying to understand what was hidden behind this silence. He was used to her moods, but in recent months they had become deeper and deeper, like cracks in old asphalt. "Are you okay?" he finally asked, putting down his spoon. "Of course," she answered too quickly. "I'm just tired. Spring, vitamin deficiency, all that." "Charlotte," he leaned a little closer, "if something's wrong, tell me. I see it." She looked up, and for a second he thought she was about to cry. But instead, she stood up, picked up her bowl, and walked over to the sink. "It's okay, Peter. Is it true? It's just, that's the day." He wanted to object, but the phone on the table vibrated. Message from the foreman. "Peter, come at 8. We need to discuss the drawings." He sighed, finished his coffee, and stood up. "Okay, I have to go. If anything happens, call me, okay?" "Okay," she nodded without turning around. Peter put on his jacket, took the keys, and went out onto the porch. The morning air was cool, with the smell of freshly cut grass. He looked back at the house. Charlotte was standing at the window, looking into the distance. Her silhouette seemed small and lonely, and for a moment he wanted to come back, hug her, tell her that everything would be okay. But instead, he got into a pickup truck and drove away. The day passed slowly. Peter worked at the construction site of a new shopping center, mixing concrete, checking reinforcement, listening to the endless arguments between the foreman and the engineer. During the break, he was sitting on a toolbox, munching on a sandwich, when Joe, his partner, approached him. "You're kind of thoughtful today," Joe said, opening a can of Coke. "What? Charlotte is blowing her mind again." "Can't stand it," Peter muttered. I don't know. She's been weird lately." "A woman is a woman," Joe chuckled. "My Linda also seems to have fallen from the moon. Either he bought her the wrong flowers or the football on TV was too loud." "Charlotte is not like that," Peter objected. Well, I don't know. He is silent a lot. This didn't happen before." Joe shrugged, taking a sip of his Coke. "Maybe it's time for her to have a baby." "How long have you been married?" "3 years." "3," Peter nodded, his throat dry. "We tried. It doesn't work." "Well, go to the doctor. What's the problem?" "Now everything is being treated. My brother didn't succeed either, and then bam, twins." Peter remained silent. She and Charlotte discussed doctors a year ago. She went, and he said everything was fine. Then Peter promised to get himself checked, but every time he put it off, he was afraid to hear that the problem was with him. What if he can't give her what she dreams of? This thought gnawed at him like a splinter under a nail. "Maybe I'll go," he finally said. "Let's see." "That's right," Joe approved. Peter forced himself to smile, but Joe's words hurt. He remembered how Charlotte once, after another negative test, locked herself in the bathroom and cried so quietly that he could barely hear. Then he knocked and asked how to help, and she just answered, "Nothing. Just leave me." Since then, such moments have become more frequent. At home, he was greeted by the smell of fried chicken. Charlotte was in the kitchen, wearing an apron, with a glass of wine in her hand. She looked a little more cheerful than in the morning, but her eyes still showed fatigue. "Hello," she said, putting the frying pan on the table. "Hungry?" "Like a wolf," Peter answered, taking off his shoes. "Did you cook?" "Yes, I decided to pamper us. Chicken with potatoes, your favorite." He sat down at the table, and she placed a plate in front of him. The food smelled delicious, but for some reason I lost my appetite. He watched her pour herself more wine and made up his mind. "Charlotte, let's talk." "About what?" She raised her eyebrows, taking a sip. "About us. About what's happening. You're not just silent all the time." She put the glass down, her fingers trembling slightly. "Peter, I told you, everything's fine. Just work, tired." "It's not just work," he interrupted. "I see. You look at me like I've failed you." Her face tensed, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't look at it that way," she said quietly. "You're making it up." "I'm not making this up. You're thinking about the children, right? Again?" Charlotte turned away, took a rag, and began to wipe the table, even though it was clean. "And if I think so, so what? This is bad." "No, not bad." He stood up and approached her. "But I want to know how you feel." "We're a team, Charlotte." She threw the rag into the sink and turned to him. Her eyes were shining from tears or from wine, he didn't understand. "Team," she repeated with a bitter smile. "Where are the results, Peter? 3 years, and what do we have? This house, chicken on the table. This is not what I dreamed of." He froze, her words hitting him like a slap in the face. "Do you think I'm not trying?" he asked, trying to keep his voice even. "I'm working, I'm here, Why am I not trying?" She interrupted. "I hope every month I do these damn tests, and every time nothing. I'm tired, Peter." Her voice broke, and she covered her face with her hands. Peter stepped towards her and wanted to hug her, but she pulled away. "No need," she said quietly. "Just give me time." "How much longer?" he asked, feeling how everything inside was shrinking. "We wanted a family. Together." "We wanted to," she nodded, looking at the floor. "But sometimes desire is not enough." She went into the bedroom, leaving him alone in the kitchen. The chicken was cooling on the table, the wine was unfinished. Peter sat down, staring into space. One thought was spinning in my head. What if it's me? If I can't? He knew he had to do something. Tomorrow he will call the clinic. Secretly, she shouldn't know until he will be sure. Peter stayed up most of the night, listening to Charlotte tossing and turning behind the wall. In the morning, he left for work without saying goodbye, leaving a note. See you in the evening. The morning in the office began with the usual hum of the coffee machine and the slight noise of voices. Charlotte sat at her desk in the small human resources department of Trio Industries, sorting resumes for a new project. Her workspace was neat, but a little cluttered. A stack of folders, a photo of Peter with a lake in the background, a mug with the inscription "Best Wife," a gift from him for their first anniversary. She loved the job, not too difficult, but important enough to feel useful. However, today her thoughts were anywhere but here. The door to the office opened and Lisa, her colleague and best friend, rushed in with her usual energy. Her red hair bounced in time with her steps, and in her hands she held 2 cups of coffee from the nearest Starbucks. "Good morning, sleepyhead." Lisa plopped down on the chair opposite. "You look like you've been having nightmares all night." "Hi," Charlotte smiled faintly, taking the coffee. "I didn't get enough sleep, yes. Thank you for saving me." "You're welcome," Lisa winked. "Listen, did you hear? We have a new one today. Some Jake from the Dallas branch. They say he's a hot guy." Charlotte rolled her eyes, taking a sip of her coffee. "Lisa, just give me gossip. I don't care who's hot, as long as he does the job." "Oh, don't pretend." Lisa leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You're not a nun. You'll look at him and tell me whether I'm right or wrong." Charlotte snorted but didn't answer. Lisa has always been like this. She loved to dramatize and tease. They had been friends since school, and if Charlotte was quiet and reserved, then Lisa was a real hurricane. Sometimes it was annoying, but more often it saved me from the blues, especially in recent months, when Charlotte increasingly retreated into herself. "Okay, where is he? You're a hot guy," she asked, just to change the subject. "He'll be here soon," Lisa waved her hand. "The boss said he'll come for instructions at 10. We'll help with logistics projects. Don't you know? You're on staff, you should know." "I didn't check my email yesterday," Charlotte admitted. "Tired after my shift." Lisa squinted, studying her. "Are you sitting at home alone and sad again? Charlotte, you need to buck up. Peter is always at his construction site, and what are you, like a nun in a monastery?" "He's working, Lisa," Charlotte frowned. "And I'm not sad. It's just, well, I don't know. Everything is fine." "It's okay," Lisa mimicked. "You say this every day, but your eyes are like those of a beaten dog. What's going on with you and Peter? Did you quarrel again?" Charlotte sighed, putting her coffee down. She didn't want to discuss it, but Lisa knew how to pull the truth out like a thread from a sweater. "We didn't quarrel. It's just, there's some tension. I myself don't know what's wrong with me." "Children?" Lisa asked directly. Charlotte nodded, looking at the table. "Yes, the last test was negative again. I'm already tired of counting." "Oh, honey," Lisa extended her hand and squeezed her palm. "Listen, maybe you should see a doctor. Now everything is being decided. My sister didn't work out either, and then bam, triplets through Eve." "I saw the doctor," Charlotte said quietly. "Everything is fine. And Peter, he doesn't want to get tested. He says that they all have at least 3 children in their family." Lisa shook her head. "Guys, they have pride, you know, and you tell him straight out. Peter, either you go to the doctor or I'll start looking for a backup plan." "Lisa," Charlotte looked at her indignantly. "Are you serious?" Just kidding," Lisa laughed. "Although, who knows, maybe you really need someone to shake up your life." Charlotte wanted to object, but then the door opened again and a man entered the office. Tall, with dark hair, wearing a simple white shirt and jeans. He carried a folder under his arm and looked slightly lost. Lisa immediately perked up. "Here he is," she whispered, nudging Charlotte. "Jake, right?" The man looked around, noticed them, and approached. "Hi, I'm Jake Reynolds," he said, holding out his hand. His voice was deep, with a slight southern accent. "They told me this is the HR department." "Yes, it's us," Charlotte stood up, shaking his hand. His palm was warm and slightly rough. I'm Charlotte, and this is Lisa. Welcome. Thank you, he smiled, and Charlotte couldn't help but notice that his smile was open, almost boyish. I'm new, so don't hit me too hard if I mess something up. We won't, Lisa winked. If you bring coffee, we'll forgive everything. Jake laughed, and Charlotte found herself staring at him a little longer than necessary. There was something familiar about him. Calm confidence, ease. She shook her head, clearing the thought. Let me show you where everything is, she suggested. We don't have a labyrinth here, but you can get confused. Great, thanks, Jake nodded. They walked around the office, Charlotte in front, him behind her. She showed him the coffee machine, the printer, the boss's office, all the while explaining the rules and schedule. Jake listened attentively, sometimes asking questions, when is lunch, or who's the big bore here? Charlotte smiled at his jokes, feeling the tension in her chest release a little. How long have you been with Trio? He asked as they stopped at her desk. 5 years, she answered. Where are you from? From Dallas, he said. They closed the branch there, so they transferred me here. A new start, so to speak. A new start is good, she nodded, not knowing why these words hurt her. Lisa, who was sitting nearby, suddenly jumped up. Charlotte, just look, she exclaimed, running up. He's the spitting image of Peter. What? Charlotte frowned, looking at her. Well, you're Peter. Lisa pointed a finger at Jake. Height, hair, even gait. Tell me you don't look like it. Charlotte looked over at Jake, and her heart skipped a beat. Lisa was right. It wasn't that they were twins, but the resemblance was striking. The broad shoulders, the slightly stooped posture, even the way he tilted his head slightly when he listened. She remembered Peter, his tired smile, his habit of rubbing the back of his head when he was nervous. Jake was younger, about 5 years, but something about him reminded her of her husband. Well, maybe a little, she said, trying to seem indifferent. A little? Lisa snorted. Yes, he is your Peter 2.0. Jake, are you married? No, he grinned. Not caught yet. Great, Lisa clapped her hands. Charlotte, take it into circulation before I have time. Charlotte rolled her eyes, but something stirred inside her. She looked at Jake, and he caught her eye. Don't listen to her, she said quickly. She always does. Yes, I'm used to it, he shrugged. I also had such a friend in Dallas. She was always marrying me off to someone. The rest of the day passed quietly. Jake was settling in, Charlotte was helping him with his papers, Lisa was throwing in her jokes. But the thought that Lisa sowed did not let go. Charlotte found herself sneaking glances at Jake, the way he wrote, the way he drank coffee, the way he laughed. It was stupid, even absurd, but the resemblance to Peter aroused a strange feeling in her. Not attraction, no more like a longing for what could have been. By evening, she stayed in the office late finishing the report. Jake stayed late too, sorting out his new responsibilities. The two of them found themselves in an empty room, only the hum of the lamps breaking the silence. Do you always stay up this late? He asked, approaching her table with a mug of tea. No, she answered, without raising her eyes from the screen. It's just a blockage today. And you? I want to get involved quickly. He sat down on the edge of Lisa's table. I don't like being a newbie who slows everyone down. Charlotte nodded, continuing to type. But his presence was distracting. She felt his gaze not intrusive, but curious. Lisa said you're married, he said suddenly. Yes, she looked up. 3 years. Cool, he smiled. My husband is probably lucky. Sometimes, she grinned, but her voice trembled. Jake fell silent, as if he felt that he had touched a sore point. Do you have someone? She asked, not knowing why. There was a girl, he shrugged. We broke up 6 months ago. She wanted a family, and well, I wasn't ready. Charlotte froze. The word family hit like a hammer on glass. She remembered Peter, their arguments, the empty nursery. I understand, she said quietly. It's not easy. Yeah, he nodded. But life goes on, right? We need to move on. They fell silent. Charlotte looked at the screen, but the letters were blurry. Her thoughts were confused. Jake was a stranger, just a colleague, but his words, his resemblance to Peter, all of this stuck with her. She stood up, packing her bag. "It's time to go home," she said. "See you tomorrow." "Good night," he answered, and there was something warm in his voice. At home, Charlotte turned on the light in the kitchen and poured herself some wine. Peter hasn't returned, yet his shift has been delayed. She sat in silence, looking at the photograph on the refrigerator. She and Peter are on the beach, laughing, happy. But today, this photo seemed alien. She thought about Jake, about his words about family, and about how Lisa called him Peter 2.0. It was a joke, of course, but a joke that stuck in my head. When Peter returned, she had already gone to bed. He quietly walked into the bedroom and kissed her forehead, thinking that she was sleeping. But Charlotte lay with her eyes open, looking at the ceiling. Her thoughts revolved around one phrase: "We must move on." And she didn't know what that meant. The morning at Peter and Charlotte's house was gray, the sky was overcast, and the wind was blowing dry leaves across the lawn. Peter stood in the living room, throwing the last of his things into his gym bag: a couple of shirts, socks, a toothbrush. His pickup truck was already waiting at the porch, and the kettle was humming in the kitchen. Charlotte was making coffee, although both knew that there was no time to drink it. In an hour, he was scheduled to leave for Tulsa, where he would have a 10-day business trip to build a new warehouse. "Are you sure you took your phone charger?" Charlotte asked, appearing at the door with two mugs. Her voice sounded even, but there was something cold in her eyes. "Yes, in the side pocket," Peter answered, zipping up the zipper. "And I took a flashlight too, just in case. There is always not enough light on the object." "Okay," she handed him the mug. "And the food? At least take some sandwiches with you, otherwise you'll sit there hungry." Peter took the coffee, took a sip, and looked at her. She stood in an old t-shirt and shorts, barefoot, with disheveled hair, so homely, so familiar. But there was a silence between them that he didn't know how to break. They had hardly spoken in recent days after that argument about the children. Charlotte had withdrawn, and he had not insisted. "I'm fine, Charlotte," he said softly. "There is a canteen there, and the guys always bring something. Don't worry." "I'm not worried," she shrugged, looking away. "I'm just saying." He nodded, feeling the words get stuck in his throat. I wanted to say something warm, to hug her, but her tone was repulsive. Peter put the mug on the table and walked closer. "I'll call you when I get there, okay?" he asked, touching her shoulder. "Okay," she nodded, but didn't look at him. "Drive carefully." He held his hand for another second, then removed it and picked up the bag. The farewell was crumpled, no hugs, no smiles, just the creaking of the door and the sound of the engine as it drove away. Charlotte remained standing in the living room, looking out the window until the pickup truck disappeared around the corner. Peter was driving down the highway, listening to old rock music on the radio. The drive to Tulsa took 3 hours, and he tried to take his mind off Charlotte. Yesterday, he finally signed up for tests at the clinic secretly, through a friend who worked there as a nurse. He said that the results would be in a week. He needed to know if he was the problem, but he didn't want to tell Charlotte. Not now, when she's already on the edge. "Damn," he muttered as the song changed to commercials. "I should have told her something." He remembered her face, tired, distant. Maybe this business trip is even for the better. 10 days apart could give them both some respite. But deep down, he feared that distance would only deepen the rift between them. At the site, he was met by Joe, his partner, already wearing a helmet and with a cigarette in his mouth. "Well, has the fugitive arrived?" He grinned, slapping Peter on the shoulder. "Did you think you'd run away from your wife for a little longer?" "Very funny," Peter muttered, pulling his bag out of the car. "What do you have here?" "Chaos, as always." Joe waved his hand towards the construction site. "New warehouse, and the drawings are crap. The foreman is already yelling that the deadline is running out. Get ready for some fun." Peter nodded, pulling on his work jacket. A job is what he needs now. Hands busy, head free. Maybe at least here he will feel at home. Charlotte was left alone. The house seemed too big without Peter. Every sound echoed in the emptiness. She turned on the TV, But the news about the weather only irritated her. Turned it off. She sat on the sofa, looking at the empty children's room through the open door. Her gaze caught on the box of children's things they bought them 2 years ago at the crossroads of hope. Booties, a couple of rattles, a tiny onesie with teddy bears. Everything lay untouched, as a reminder of what was not there. The phone rang and she jumped. It was Lisa. "Hello, lonely soul." The friend's voice sounded cheerful. "Peter left?" "Yes, just now," Charlotte replied, rubbing her temple. "Why are you calling?" "I'm bored," Lisa chuckled. "Let's go somewhere in the evening. There's live music at the Red Fox tonight." "Lisa, I'm not in the mood," Charlotte sighed. "I just want to sit at home." "That's exactly why you need to get out," Lisa insisted. "You're not an old woman. Peter is on a business trip, and what are you going to do here?" "Come on, Charlotte, shake it up." Charlotte hesitated. She really didn't want to go anywhere, but the thought of 10 days alone was scary. Maybe Lisa is right. "Okay," she gave in. "At what time?" "I'll pick you up at 7. Lisa was clearly delighted. "Wear something nice, otherwise you'll walk around like you're in pajamas all day." Charlotte smiled despite herself. "Okay, tyrant. Until evening." "See you later, beauty." Lisa hung up. Charlotte leaned back on the sofa, looking at the ceiling. She needed a distraction. From Peter, from the empty room, from the one-line tests she hid in the bathroom drawer. Maybe an evening with Lisa is what she needs right now. The Red Fox was a small bar on the outskirts of town, wooden walls, dim lights, the smell of beer and frying wings. When Charlotte and Lisa entered, the crowd inside was already buzzing. A band was playing on stage, a guy with a guitar was singing something about a broken heart, and people were singing along, waving bottles. Charlotte put on jeans and a black blouse, feeling slightly out of place. Lisa, on the contrary, was in a bright red dress and was already pulling her towards the counter. "2 margaritas," she shouted to the bartender over the music. "Lisa, I don't want to drink," Charlotte protested. "Oh, relax," Lisa waved her hand. "1 cocktail will not make you an alcoholic." Charlotte gave in, taking the glass. The drink was cold, with a sharp lime taste. She took a sip, feeling the warmth spreading through her body. "Well, how?" Lisa winked. "Is life getting better?" "I don't know yet," Charlotte grinned. "But the music is okay." "That's great." Lisa looked around the room. "Look how many people there are. Maybe we can find you a gentleman for the evening." "Lisa, I'm married." Charlotte looked at her sternly. "And what?" The friend shrugged. "Peter is in Tulsa, and you are here. Nobody will know." Charlotte shook her head, but Lisa's words stung. She imagined Peter, his tired eyes, his silence. He was far away, and for the first time in 3 years, it didn't make her sad, but something else. Freedom? Anger? She couldn't make it out. They found a table near the stage, and Lisa immediately began chatting about work, about the new boss, about Jake. "Listen, he's really cool," she said, sipping her cocktail. "Today he helped me with the report, and then he brought me some coffee. And guess what? He asked about you." "About me?" Charlotte frowned. "For what?" "He said he thought you were cute." Lisa grinned. "I told you, he's your type. Peter 2.0, remember?" Charlotte rolled her eyes, but something stirred inside her. She remembered Jake, his smile, his calm voice. It was stupid, but the thought of it did not let go. "Lisa, that's enough," she said. "He's just a colleague." "Just a colleague who has a crush on you," Lisa winked. "Okay, if you don't want to, don't. But if I were you, I wouldn't miss the chance." Charlotte remained silent, looking at the stage. The singer switched to a slow song, and the hall fell silent. She thought about Peter, about how he was probably sitting in some diner with Joe, eating a burger and drinking beer. And she is here, with Lisa, in the bar, where no one knows her pain. "You know," she said suddenly, "I'm tired of waiting." "What?" Lisa turned to her. "Everything will work itself out." Charlotte looked at her. "Peter says so. But nothing is getting better." "Oh, honey," Lisa squeezed her hand. "Then don't wait. Do something yourself." Charlotte nodded but didn't answer. Her gaze fell on the calendar behind the counter. She knew that today was the day of ovulation. Another chance that will pass by again. She finished her cocktail, feeling the alcohol drown out her melancholy. She returned home after midnight. Lisa dropped her off, singing something cheerful, and left, leaving Charlotte alone. She turned on the light, threw her bag on the sofa, and went to the mirror in the corridor. Her reflection looked alien pale face, dark circles under her eyes. "What am I doing?" she whispered, touching the glass. There was no answer. She went to bed, but sleep did not come. Instead, she thought about Peter, about Jake, about Lisa's words. Do things yourself. Maybe it's time, but what exactly, she didn't know. I didn't know yet. The morning of the next day after Peter left for a business trip greeted Charlotte with silence. She woke up late, with a slight heaviness in her head from yesterday's cocktail. The house was empty, like a switched-off TV, no sound of footsteps, no smell of the coffee that Peter usually brewed. She lay in bed, looking at the ceiling, until the alarm clock reminded her that it was time to get ready for work. Charlotte stood up, pulled on jeans and a sweater, and hastily made tea. Her gaze fell on the note that Peter left yesterday. "See you in the evening, words from another life," when he had not yet left. She crumpled the paper and threw it in the trash, feeling a pang of irritation. He didn't even call yesterday, although he promised. Maybe he's busy. Maybe I forgot. She didn't care, or so she convinced herself. It was drizzling outside, and Charlotte, grabbing an umbrella, went to the car. The drive to the office took 15 minutes, the usual route through a sleepy suburb, past houses with identical lawns. She turned on the radio, but instead of music, she caught the weather forecast. Rain all day, temperature +10. Charlotte turned off the radio, leaving only the rustle of tires on wet asphalt. The Trio Industries office greeted her with the usual hum. Lisa was already there, sitting at her desk with a huge mug of coffee and her laptop. "Good morning, survivor," she shouted when she saw Charlotte. "How did you like last night?" "Okay," Charlotte threw her bag on the chair. "Only my head is a little buzzing." "It's from Margarita," Lisa grinned. "I told you I should have taken the second one, then I wouldn't have felt it at all." Charlotte smiled faintly as she turned on the computer. "Thanks for the advice, but I'll pass. Today I'll just finish my shift and go home." "Well, no." Lisa stood up, going to her table. "You came to life yesterday, I saw it. Let's go somewhere else this evening." "Lisa, I'm not made of iron." Charlotte shook her head. "And my report is unfinished." The boss had already hinted that it was time to give up. Lisa rolled her eyes, but didn't argue. She returned to her seat, muttering something about boring workaholics. Charlotte opened the report file, but couldn't concentrate. Her thoughts revolved around yesterday's conversation, Lisa's words about how she needed to do something herself. It sounded so simple, but what exactly? Leave Peter? Start all over again? Or should we just stop waiting for a miracle? The office door opened and Jake walked in. He was wearing a dark jacket, with raindrops on his hair, and carrying a folder under his arm. "Hello, ladies," he said, shaking water off his sleeves. "The weather is rubbish, right?" "Good morning, hero," Lisa winked. "You're early today." "I want to get involved," he smiled, looking at Charlotte. "Hello, Charlotte. How are you?" She looked up, catching his gaze. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, and there was a lightness in his voice that she so missed at home. "Hello," she replied. "Fine. How are you?" "Wet, but alive," he laughed, taking off his jacket. Charlotte nodded, turning back to the screen, but watching it out of the corner of her eye. Jake hung his jacket over the back of his chair and sat down at his desk, 2 seats away from her. She remembered Lisa's words, Peter 2.0. It was stupid, but the resemblance still stuck. The day passed slowly. Charlotte was typing a report. Lisa was chatting on the phone. Jake was sorting out papers. By lunchtime, the rain had picked up, hammering on the windows, and the office was filled with gray light. Lisa suggested going to the cafe across the street, but Charlotte refused. She didn't want to get wet. "I'll stay," she said. "I'll have a snack here." "As you wish," Lisa shrugged, putting on her cloak. "Jake, are you with us?" "No, I'll stay too." He nodded at the folder. We need to finish this before the end of the day. Lisa left, slamming the door, and the office became quiet. Charlotte took an apple and yogurt out of her bag, feeling awkward in the silence. Jake sat at his desk, writing something, occasionally glancing in her direction. Finally, he stood up and walked over to the coffee machine. "Will you have some coffee?" he asked, turning around. "Oh, no, thank you." Charlotte shook her head. "I already drank this morning." "But I can't live without him," he smiled, pressing the button, "especially in this weather." The machine hummed, filling the air with the aroma of coffee. Charlotte watched him leaning against the table and suddenly said, "You're right, the weather is terrible. You can't do without an umbrella at home. Do you have a house?" He raised his eyebrows. "I thought you and your husband live in an apartment." "No home," she grinned. "Small, but ours. Where do you live?" "I rent an apartment in the center." He took the mug and took a sip. "For now, it's temporary. I haven't decided yet whether I'll stay here or not." Charlotte nodded, taking a bite of her apple. It was strange for her to talk to him so simply, but there was something pleasant about it. He did not press, did not bother with questions like Lisa, but simply chatted easily, naturally. "Where is your husband?" he asked suddenly. Lisa said he's on a business trip. "Yes," she hesitated. "Left yesterday. For 10 days. Long," Jake whistled. "Isn't it boring to be alone?" "A little," she admitted, looking at the table. "But I'm used to it. He leaves often." He nodded as if he understood more than she said. Charlotte felt a slight pang. She didn't want him to think of her as a lonely wife. But there was no pity in his gaze, only interest. "If anything happens, call me," he said suddenly. "I'm new here, I don't have many friends. We can have coffee after work if you want." "Oh," she was confused. "Thank you, but I don't know. Work, affairs." "No problem," he raised his hands. "Just suggested." Lisa returned from the cafe, loudly telling how her boss called again and demanded something urgently. Charlotte listened with half an ear as she finished her work. Jake also got ready to leave. He put on his jacket, gave her a short bye, and left. The office was empty and silence fell over her again. She turned off the computer, took her bag, and walked towards the exit. At the door, in the parking lot, she saw Jake. He stood under the lantern, rummaging in his pockets, apparently looking for his keys. The rain left stains on his jacket, and his hair stuck to his forehead. Charlotte stopped, not knowing what to do. Leave? Say hello? "Hey," he noticed her first, smiling. "Are you late too?" "Yes," she came closer. "I was finishing the report. And you?" "I forgot the folder. I came back. It's good that you're here. Otherwise, I already thought that I would get stuck." They laughed quietly, awkwardly. Charlotte felt the stress of the day lift. "The weather is really rubbish," she said, looking at the puddles. "Yeah," he nodded. "Listen, are you in a car?" "Yes, over there," she pointed to her old Ford. "Great," he stepped towards her. "Would you like to give me a ride to the corner? I'm not far from here, but I don't feel like being in the rain." Charlotte hesitated. It was a small thing, just giving a colleague a ride. "It's okay," but something in his request, in his gaze, made her heart clench. "Okay," she said finally. "Let's go." They got into the car. The salon smelled of her perfume and wet clothes. Charlotte started the engine and turned on the wipers. Jake sat next to him, looking out the window. "Thank you," he said. "I don't like getting wet." "You're welcome," she smiled, driving out of the parking lot. "Where are you going?" "On Baker Street, third house," he pointed ahead. 5 minutes. The road took a little longer. A traffic jam at the intersection delayed them. They chatted about trifles, about the rain, about work, about how Lisa always annoys everyone. Charlotte found herself feeling at ease with him easier than she had been with Peter in recent months. When they got there, Jake turned to her. "Thank you again," he said. "You helped me out." "Okay," she shrugged. "Good night." Calm, he opened the door, but hesitated. "If anything, Lisa has my number. Call if you're bored." He left, and Charlotte remained sitting, looking after him. Her fingers clenched the steering wheel. It was nothing, just a trip. But why then did she feel like she had done something forbidden? The day at the office dragged on slowly, like melted wax. Charlotte sat at her desk, staring at the computer screen, but the letters blurred into meaningless blurs. Her thoughts were far away somewhere between the empty house, Peter leaving, and last night with Jake, when they were alone for the first time after work. It was just coffee in a cafe across the street, but his smile, his calm voice, his lightness touched something in her that she had not felt for a long time. Lisa left early, citing a headache, and the office was empty by 6 in the evening. Charlotte stayed to finish the report, although she could have left work was just an excuse not to return to the silence of the house. Jake also lingered, sitting at his desk with a pile of papers. His presence was unobtrusive, but noticeable like the warmth from a lamp in a cold room. "Are you sitting here until night again?" he asked, looking up from the screen and stretching. His voice sounded soft, with a slight hoarseness. "Yes," Charlotte looked up. "I don't want to clear away the rubble tomorrow." "And you?" "Same thing," he smiled, rubbing the back of his head, a gesture that reminded her of Peter again. "But I'm already giving up. Maybe coffee?" She hesitated. Yesterday's coffee at the cafe was innocent, just talking about work, about Dallas, about how he was getting used to the new place. But today there was something else in the air, something she couldn't name. "Okay," she said finally, "only for a short time." They went down to the cafe across the street, a small place with wooden tables and the smell of fresh buns. Charlotte ordered a latte, Jake ordered a black coffee. They sat by the window, looking at the occasional cars passing by. "Are you always this quiet?" he asked, taking a sip. "Not always," she shrugged. I don't know. Tired, probably." "I understand," he nodded. "Work, home, everything is piling up. I had the same thing in Dallas. Sometimes you just want to run away." Charlotte looked at him. His face was open, without a hint of pretense. She suddenly wanted to tell him everything about Peter, about the empty nursery, about the tests that she hid in the bathroom. But instead she said, "Where would you run away to?" "Somewhere where it's warm," he chuckled. "Maybe on the coast. And you?" "I don't know." She looked away. "Sometimes it seems like there's nowhere to run." He fell silent, looking at her. Her words hung in the air, and Charlotte felt her cheeks begin to burn. She pretended to drink coffee, although the cup was already almost empty. "Listen," he said suddenly, "if you want, we can take a walk. The weather is good, but sitting here is boring." She nodded, not trusting her voice. They went outside, and the evening air embraced her with coolness. They walked in silence along the quiet streets of the suburbs, past houses with lit windows. Jake was telling him something about his old job in Dallas, about how he once got stuck in an elevator with his boss, but Charlotte was only half listening. Her thoughts were confused, she felt alive next to him, and it was scary. They reached a park on the edge of the city small, with a couple of benches and an old lantern. Charlotte sat down, looking at the dark trees, and Jake settled down next to her. "Are you okay?" he asked, noticing her silence. "Yes," she lied. "I was just thinking." "About what?" He turned to her, and his gaze was too attentive. Charlotte opened her mouth to say something banal, but blurted out instead. "About the fact that everything is not the way I wanted." He didn't answer right away, just looked at her. And then he reached out and touched her palm lightly, almost by accident. But this touch burned her like a spark. "Sometimes you can change everything," he said quietly. She didn't remove her hand. Her heart was pounding, and she knew she had to get up, walk away, say she was married. But instead she leaned closer, and he kissed her, softly, hesitantly, as if testing her. Charlotte froze, and then answered, feeling all the barriers inside crumble. They returned to her home. Charlotte didn't remember how she made this decision. Everything was in a fog. The door slammed behind them, and Jake pulled her towards him, kissing her more boldly. Her hands trembled as she took off his jacket, and his fingers slid along her back. It was wrong, she knew, but at that moment she didn't care. They fell onto the sofa in the living room before reaching the bedroom. The clothes fell to the floor, and Charlotte closed her eyes, giving in to the moment. This was not love, it was despair. When it was over, they lay in the dark, breathing heavily. Charlotte stared at the ceiling, feeling reality return. Jake turned to her and ran his hand through her hair. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she lied, although everything inside was screaming. He smiled, kissed her forehead, and stood up to fetch water. Charlotte remained lying there, looking at his shadow in the kitchen. Her phone was on the table, and she knew Peter would call at any moment. But he didn't call. The next morning the phone still rang. Charlotte winced, snatching it from the nightstand. Jake left at night, leaving her alone, and she barely slept, replaying what had happened in her head. Peter's name flashed on the screen. "Hi," she said, trying to sound calm. "Hi," his voice was tired. "I arrived fine. I didn't have time to write yesterday. How are you?" "It's a mess here," he sighed. "Construction is delayed. The foreman said at least 2 more weeks. Supply problems." Charlotte froze. 2 weeks. This meant that Peter would not return in 10 days as planned. 3 weeks in total. Her heart sank from relief or fear, she didn't know. "2 weeks?" she asked again. "Yes," he paused. "Can you handle it alone?" Of course, she forced herself to smile, although he didn't see it. "Work calmly." "Okay," he said. "I'll call you tomorrow. Love you." "And I love you," she answered automatically, and the receiver fell silent. She threw the phone on the bed, covering her face with her hands. "Love you." These words cut like a knife. She had just slept with another man and Peter had no idea. Her fingers trembled as she stood up and went to the bathroom. Her face was reflected in the mirror pale, with dark circles under her eyes. She looked guilty and it was unbearable. The day passed in a blur. She avoided Jake's gaze in the office, but he approached her during lunch break, holding 2 sandwiches. "Hello," he said quietly. "I thought maybe we could eat together." "Jake," she looked at him. "Yesterday, it was a mistake." "A mistake?" He frowned. "Do you think so?" "I'm married." Her voice trembled. "This shouldn't have happened." He fell silent, looking at her. Then he nodded. "Okay," he said. "If that's what you want, I won't push. But I don't regret it." Charlotte turned away, feeling tears sting her eyes. She wanted to say that she was sorry, that it was stupid, but she couldn't. Because part of her, the one that was tired of loneliness and pain, did not regret anything. By evening, he was back at her house. She didn't know how it happened, she just opened the door when he knocked, and it all started again. They didn't talk about it, they just fell into each other like into an abyss. Charlotte justified herself. Peter was far away, he wouldn't recognize her, but she deserved at least a drop of happiness. But every time Jake left, the guilt returned like a shadow. The week flew by unnoticed. They met after work, had dinner, walked, and stayed with her. Charlotte found herself looking at him and seeing not Peter, but someone new, a person who did not know her pain, did not carry her burden. She didn't love him, but he was the salvation she didn't I was waiting for. Peter called a couple of times, briefly talked about the construction, but his voice became colder. Charlotte answered mechanically, hiding the truth. Her life was divided into 2 parts, one with Jake, full of warmth and oblivion, the other with Peter, full of lies and emptiness. And she didn't know how long she could balance between them. Charlotte woke up to the sound of raindrops hitting the window, lying in the bed that still held Jake's warmth. He left an hour ago, before dawn, so as not to run into the neighbors, and she was left alone, looking at the ceiling. Her body ached with fatigue, but her mind was empty for the first time in a long time. She wasn't thinking about the tests, about Peter, about what would happen next. It was frightening and calming at the same time. She stood up, pulled on her robe, and went to the kitchen. There was a cup on the table that Jake had left from last night's dinner. He brought pizza, and they ate straight from the box, laughing at some nonsense. Charlotte took the cup, about to wash it, but stopped. Her fingers walked along the edge, and she suddenly realized that she did not want to erase this mark. It was a stupid, almost childish feeling, but it held her like an anchor. The phone was lying on the windowsill, and she checked it. No calls, no messages from Peter. He called 2 days ago, briefly said that construction was going slowly, that he was tired, and hung up. His voice was distant, like an echo, and Charlotte didn't know what to say. She texted him, "How are you?" But there was no answer. Maybe he was sleeping. Maybe he was busy. Or maybe he just didn't want to talk. The day at the office passed in a blur. Charlotte sat at her desk, typing up reports, but her eyes kept flicking to Jake. He was the opposite in his usual white shirt, with slightly disheveled hair. Lisa noticed this, and as always, could not resist. "Well, lovebirds," she whispered, sitting down with Charlotte at lunchtime, "are you officially a couple now?" "Lisa, be quiet." Charlotte cast a stern look at her. "There is nothing like that." "Yeah, of course," Lisa grinned, biting into an apple. "I see how you look at each other. And yesterday he was with you again, right?" Charlotte blushed, but didn't answer. Lisa knew too much. She saw how Jake saw Charlotte off after work, how they left together. The friend did not judge. On the contrary, she teased me, as if it were a game. "You're not going to tell him everything, are you?" Charlotte asked, lowering her voice. "To whom?" "Peter." Lisa snorted. "I wasn't even going to. It's your secret." "Relax, Charlotte. Live for yourself for once." Charlotte nodded, but Lisa's words did not reassure her. She looked at Jake. He was joking with another colleague, laughing, and his laughter was so lively, so real. She was drawn to him, and she couldn't stop it. After work, he approached her table when everyone had already left. "Shall we go for a walk?" he asked, throwing his backpack over his shoulder. "Jake," she sighed, "we shouldn't." "Why?" He leaned closer. His voice became quieter. "You don't regret it, Charlotte." "I see." She was silent, looking into his eyes. He was right, she didn't regret it. Not really. It was like a breath of air after a long dive underwater. "Okay," she said finally, but not for long. They didn't just take a walk. They ended up at her house again. It became almost a ritual after work. He would come to her, they would cook something simple or order food, talk about everything and nothing, and then fall into bed. Charlotte did not resist. She wanted it, wanted his warmth, his hands, his voice. Jake wasn't Peter, and it was both painful and liberating. That evening they sat on the sofa, finishing the bottle of wine he had brought. There was some old movie playing on the TV screen, but no one was watching. Jake hugged her, pulling her towards him, and Charlotte buried herself in his shoulder. "Have you ever thought about children?" she asked suddenly, not knowing why. "I thought," he shrugged, "but not now. Maybe in 5 years. And you?" "I—" She hesitated. "I always wanted them." He looked at her, and there was something soft, almost tender, in his gaze. "You still have everything ahead," he said. "You are young, beautiful. Everything will be fine." Charlotte smiled, but something tightened inside her. She didn't tell him about Peter, about the years of trying, about the empty nursery. Jake saw her as a woman full of potential, not one broken by expectations, and she liked it. He kissed her, and the wine was forgotten. They found themselves in the bedroom again, and Charlotte gave herself completely to him, drowning out the voice in her head that whispered, "You are betraying." She didn't want to think about Peter, didn't want to remember his tired eyes. Jake was here, and he was real. The week flew by like a dream. They met every evening, walked through the park, had dinner in small eateries, and returned to her. Charlotte began to notice not just similarities with Peter, but something of her own. His humor, his lightness, his ability to listen. He didn't ask about her husband, didn't pry into her soul, and that made everything easier. She did not love him, it was not the same feeling, but he became her salvation, an island in the sea of U-200B, U-200B, her loneliness. One night, lying next to him, she watched him sleep. His chest rose and fell, his hair fell over his forehead, and Charlotte suddenly thought, what if things had been different, if only I had met him earlier? The thought was dangerous, but she couldn't push it away. Jake wasn't Peter, he didn't bear her pain, didn't know her failures. With him she felt different, not a wife, not someone who was waiting, but just a woman. Peter called on Friday evening while Charlotte was peeling potatoes in the kitchen. Jake sat in the living room, leafing through a magazine he found on the shelf. She wiped her hands and picked up the phone, trying to sound natural. "Hi," Peter said. His voice was hoarse, as if he had not slept all night. "Hi," she swallowed. "How are you?" "Okay," he coughed. "Construction is underway, but slowly. Still stuck here." "You said 2 weeks," she recalled, feeling her heart speed up. "Yes, but now it looks like it's 3, he sighed. "The suppliers failed. The concrete was not delivered. Sorry, Charlotte." She was silent, looking at the knife in her hand. 3 weeks. That meant another week with Jake, another week of this strange, wrong freedom. "Nothing," she said finally. Work calmly. "How are you?" he asked. "Aren't you bored alone?" "No," she lied. "Lisa comes in. She has a lot to do at work. Everything is fine." "Okay," he paused. "Okay, I'll go. Tired as a dog." "Good night," she said. "Calm," he answered, and the connection was cut off. Charlotte put down the phone, feeling her stomach tighten. Jake walked into the kitchen, holding a magazine. "Everything is fine?" he asked, noticing her face. "Yes," she nodded, forcing herself to smile. "My husband just called." "Oh," Jake put the magazine on the table. "Is he okay?" "Yes," she turned to the sink. "It's just delayed." He came up from behind and hugged her around the waist. "So we still have time," he whispered, kissing her neck. Charlotte closed her eyes, letting his warmth drown out her guilt. She knew it was wrong. She knew Peter didn't deserve this. But she couldn't stop. Jake was here, and Peter was somewhere far away, in another world that was becoming more and more alien. By the end of the week, Charlotte had become accustomed to his presence. His jacket hung in the hallway, his scent lingered on the pillows. She found herself waiting for the evening, waiting for his steps at the door. It was not just physical attraction, he gave her something that she had not received from Peter for a long time, the feeling of being seen, of being alive. But every night when he left, she looked at the photo of Peter on the refrigerator and felt a stab of pain. She didn't know how long she could live like this between two men, between truth and lies, and she didn't know what would happen when Peter returned. While she simply closed her eyes and fell into Jake's arms, as if into an abyss from which she did not want to get out. The 3 weeks of the business trip dragged on for Peter like an endless gray ribbon of highway. Construction in Tulsa turned out to be a real nightmare. Concrete was delayed, workers went on strike, and the foreman screamed so hard his ears were blocked. He slept in a cheap motel, ate burgers from a diner, and almost didn't call Charlotte, not because he didn't want to. He missed her being close to her for 3 weeks, and the last attempts to have sex were not like their lovemaking, but purely mechanical actions. He didn't call because he didn't know what to say. Their last conversation before leaving cold, strained, still hung in the air, like an unfinished letter. The morning of his return was clear but cold. Peter drove home with the letter crumpled in his fist. He discovered it back in Tulsa, in the solitude of a motel room, under the dim light of a lamp. The words on the paper hit him like shards of glass. Complete infertility. The probability of conception is 0%. 3 years of hopes, 3 years of her tears, his guilt, everything collapsed in one moment. He didn't sleep after that, didn't eat, just sat staring at the wall until dawn, forcing him to pack his things and get into the pickup truck. The road home was long, and every kilometer he replayed in his head what he would say to Charlotte, how he would look into her eyes, knowing that he had let her down forever. When he turned onto their street, the sun was already setting, turning the white fence crimson. The house looked the same, cozy, familiar, but now it seemed alien to him, like a set from an old movie. Peter parked, turned off the engine and froze, clutching the steering wheel. His heart was pounding, and there was a lump in his throat. He didn't want to go in, didn't want to see her face when she found out. But he had to. The bag remained in the car. He only took the keys and entered, throwing them on the table in the hallway. His legs trembled, but he forced himself to step further. "Charlotte?" His voice was hoarse, almost alien. She walked out of the kitchen, wiping her hands with a towel. She was wearing a long jacket, jeans, her hair in a careless bun so dear, so distant. Her face lit up with a smile, wide and radiant, as if she had been waiting for this moment all her life. Peter froze, feeling the blood drain from his face. "You're back," she exclaimed, rushing towards him. "I've been waiting for you." She hugged him, pressing her whole body, and Peter automatically hugged her, but his hands were cold as ice. Her joy cut him like a knife because he knew the truth. He wanted to pull away and tell her, but she spoke first, her voice trembling with delight. "Peter, I have news for you." She stepped back, looking into his eyes, and her smile grew even wider. "I'm pregnant. I took a test a couple of days ago." "This is true." The world around him collapsed. His mind began to spin as if in a whirlpool, and his legs gave way. He grabbed the edge of the table to keep from falling, and his breathing became heavy and ragged. Charlotte looked at him, her smile slowly fading, replaced by concern. "Peter?" Her voice trembled. "What's wrong with you?" He couldn't speak. His chest felt tight, as if someone had squeezed the air out of him. He collapsed into a chair, gasping for air, and the letter fell from his trembling hand onto the floor. Charlotte rushed towards him, grabbing him by the shoulders. "Peter, what happened? Are you feeling bad?" Her voice became high, almost a scream. He looked up, and his gaze was empty, dead. "I can't have children," he managed, and every word fell like a stone. "I took tests before the business trip. Zero chance." Silence struck like thunder. Charlotte froze, her hands hanging in the air. Her face turned pale, her lips trembled, but she did not make a sound. Peter looked at her, and his world collapsed not quietly as before, but with a crash, like a house under a hammer blow. "How is this possible?" His voice broke into a hoarse, almost a growl. "Charlotte, how?" She stepped back, pressing her back against the sink. Her eyes darted around like those of a hunted animal, and her hands grabbed the towel, crumpling it into a ball. "I..." She swallowed. "I don't know. Maybe a mistake? Error?" He jumped up, and the chair fell to the floor with a crash. "I held it in my hands. In black and white, I am infertile." His voice echoed off the walls, and Charlotte flinched, covering her face with her hands. Tears flowed down her cheeks, but she remained silent. Peter stepped towards her, his fists clenched, and something dark, poisonous burned in his chest. "Tell me," he growled, "whose child is this?" "Peter, please," she sobbed, her voice breaking into tears. "I don't know what to say. I'm happy that I'm pregnant. Isn't that the main thing?" He looked at her, and his body trembled from rage, from pain, from horror. Her tears, her words, everything was a lie, and he felt it on his skin. His hand hit the table, and the bowl of soup shattered, flooding the floor with hot broth. Charlotte screamed, staggering back, and Peter turned and walked towards the door, without looking at her. "Peter," her voice caught up with him, full of despair. "Wait," but he didn't stop. The door slammed behind him, and he found himself on the porch, exposed to the cold wind. His knees buckled, and he collapsed on the steps, gasping for air. The world was spinning, and one thought was beating in my head. "This is not mine." Charlotte remained inside, pressed against the wall, her tears mingling with the smell of spilled soup. Everything she had built, everything she had hidden, was coming apart at the seams, and she knew this was just the beginning. Peter sat on the porch steps, holding his head in his hands. The cold wind whipped across his face, but he did not notice a storm was raging inside him, drowning out everything. His breathing was ragged, as if after a blow, and her face stood before his eyes shining, deceitful. "I am pregnant." Those words echoed in his skull, mingling with the truth from the letter. Total infertility. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. He just clenched his fists until his nails dug into his skin. The door behind him creaked, and he heard her steps slow, trembling. Charlotte stopped in the doorway, her shadow falling on the steps. "Peter," her voice was weak, almost broken. "Come back. We need to talk." He didn't move. His throat tightened, and he squeezed out through his teeth. "Go away." She didn't listen. Her bare feet padded across the cold boards, and she sank down onto the step nearby, so close that he felt the warmth of her body. Her hand reached out to him, but froze without touching. "I can't be silent anymore," she said, and her voice trembled. "You are right. It's not yours." Peter turned sharply, and his eyes flashed in the darkness. a mixture of rage and pain. What? His voice was hoarse, like the roar of a wounded animal. Charlotte cringed, but didn't look away. Her face was wet with tears, her lips trembled, but there was determination in her eyes, as if she had finally dropped the mask. "I cheated on you," she blurted out, each word falling like a hammer blow. "While you were in Tulsa. I didn't want it to happen like this, but I couldn't wait any longer." Peter felt the ground disappear from under his feet. His body swayed, and he grabbed the railing to keep from falling. His mind refused to accept it. She, his Charlotte, the woman he had loved for 3 years, but her words were too real, too poignant. "Who?" he growled, squeezing the railing so that the wood creaked. "Jake," she said quietly, almost in a whisper. "New guy from work." The name hit him like a bullet. Jake. He didn't know it, but the name was now burned into his brain. Peter stood up, staggering, and looked down at her. His face was a mask of pain and anger. "Why?" His voice broke into a scream. "Why, Charlotte?" She jumped up after her, her hands trembling, but she did not back down. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but her voice became louder, almost furious. "Because I was going crazy," she shouted, and her words echoed along the empty street. 3 years, Peter. For 3 years I waited for a child, prayed, cried, and you. You delayed the tests. If you had checked earlier, I would have known. I wouldn't have come to this." He took a step towards her, and she recoiled, but did not remain silent. Her eyes burned with despair, guilt, anger. "I didn't care anymore from whom," she continued, her voice trembling, but did not weaken. "I wanted a child, you know. I wanted it so much that I couldn't live without it anymore. People adopt children, love strangers, and I thought you could love this one as your own." Peter froze, looking at her as if she were a stranger. Her words were a knife, cutting deeper and deeper. He opened his mouth, but at first he could not squeeze out a sound. His throat was constricted with rage and pain. "To fall in love?" He finally croaked, his voice low as thunder. "Are you serious? After you betrayed me?" She sobbed, holding out her hand, but he recoiled as if from fire. "Yes, people become parents to other people's children," he said, and every word was saturated with poison. "But not like that, Charlotte. Not the way you did it. Not after you laid with someone else while I was in Tulsa, exhausted at this damn construction site, thinking about you." Her face contorted as if he had hit her. She covered her mouth with her hand, but the tears flowed uncontrollably. "I didn't want to lose you," she whispered. "I thought we could." "Can we do what?" He stepped closer, and his voice became louder, almost a scream. "Live with this. Look at him every day and see your betrayal. This child is not mine, and he will never be mine. It will be an eternal reminder of what you did." Charlotte trembled, her knees gave way, and she collapsed back onto the step, covering her face with her hands. Her cry was quiet, but piercing like the howl of the wind. Peter looked down at her, and his heart was breaking from the love that was still warm and from the hatred that was growing like fire. "I can't love him," he said, and his voice became cold, almost dead. "Never." She raised her eyes, full of horror and pleading. "Peter, please," her voice broke. "Don't go. We can fix everything." He shook his head, retreating to the pickup truck. His hands were shaking, but he forced himself to open the door. To correct, his laughter was bitter, like poison. "You ruined everything, Charlotte. All." He got into the car, slammed the door, and started the engine. She jumped up, screaming his name, but he didn't look back. The pickup pulled away, leaving her on the porch, a small, broken figure under the dim light of the lantern. Her scream was drowned in the noise of the engine, and Peter drove along the road, seeing nothing in front of him except her face and the words that tore his life apart. Peter stayed at a motel on the outskirts of town, an old one with peeling paint and a creaky bed. He threw his bag on the floor and collapsed onto the mattress, staring at the ceiling. His chest hurt, as if someone had torn a piece out of it. He didn't cry, no tears came, but everything inside was screaming. Her confession was spinning in my head like a broken record. I was going crazy. I didn't care who it was from. "You can love." Every word was like a blow, and he didn't know what hurt more, her betrayal or her excuses. She blamed him for delaying the tests, for not giving her a child. But he couldn't believe that she would do this, that she would choose someone else while he was away, trusting her. He took out his phone, but the screen remained dark. He didn't want to write to her, didn't want to hear her voice. Instead, he remembered their marriage, their first night in this house, her laughter, her tears after another test. Was this all real, or was he just fooling himself? Now he didn't know. Peter stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the empty parking lot. The night was black, only the light from the highway flickered in the distance. He thought about Jake, that foreign name that had now become part of his life. Who is he? What does he look like? Peter didn't know, but he would find him. Not for revenge, he was too broken for that, but to understand how far Charlotte had come. He returned to the bed, lay down and closed his eyes, but sleep did not come. Instead, he saw her crying, begging, and heard her words, "You can love." No, he can't. This child was a stranger, and he would always be a stranger, a living reminder of her betrayal. The night dragged on forever, and Peter lay in the dark, feeling his world turn to ash. Peter woke up in the trailer that became his temporary home after his divorce. It was barely dawn outside the window, and a pinkish light cut through the cramped space, sliding across the table and narrow bed. That night he had trouble sleeping again. Dreams about Charlotte, about their broken home, and how she announced her pregnancy from another man again rose before his eyes, causing protest and self-pity. He knew that it was necessary to move on, and yet there remained a feeling of sadness inside, as if the final point had not yet been put in this nightmare. About 2 weeks have passed since the divorce. He had already received documents from the court. Now he had an official certificate in his hands confirming that his marriage to Charlotte was dissolved. It would seem that everything is enough. But there was still confusion in his soul. He continued to think about how much his life had changed. However, Peter knew that nothing could be taken back. Charlotte sat in the waiting room of the city antenatal clinic, clutching the results of the latest ultrasound in her hands. The pregnancy was approaching the end of the second trimester, and nothing could be hidden. The belly was rounded, the movements of the baby were becoming more and more clear inside. Every time she felt the tremors, she thought about how recently she desperately wanted to become a mother, and now it finally came true. But her heart was not filled with unconditional joy. Too much had happened. She was left alone, without Peter, without Jake's support. The doctor, examining her, tried to cheer her up. "Everything is fine with you. The fetus is developing normally." But this only made her feel sadder, because she understood that the happiness of motherhood was overshadowed by difficult circumstances. After the divorce, Charlotte cried for a long time and did not know what to do with herself. The house that had once seemed like her safe haven now brought her pain because she saw traces of Peter everywhere. The thought that she had betrayed him, even in despair, became unbearable, and the knowledge that there was a child inside her that he would never accept made every day feel like torture. She took sick leave at work at Trio Industries. The stress and inevitable sidelong glances of her colleagues made being in the office unbearable. Lisa, her red-haired friend, tried to be supportive at first, but soon said in disappointment, "Charlotte, I don't know how to help you if you're withdrawing into yourself." Charlotte at some point decided, "I won't give up." She firmly told herself that she had to cope, because now there would be a child in her life for which she was waiting for so long. She didn't have enough money for long, although she had some small savings. The house required payment for utilities, and food for a pregnant woman became a separate expense item. Charlotte understood, if Jake did not help, she would have to challenge his paternity in court and demand alimony. It was inexpressibly hard for her to think about it, but she understood that for the sake of the unborn child, she would have to overcome her pride. When she tried to talk to Jake, at first he answered, "I'm not ready. We need to think. Let's discuss everything later." Then he began to avoid her altogether. Colleagues hinted that Jake seemed to be heading to another company. He avoided meeting Charlotte, and every time she caught herself feeling hopeless. Am I going to be completely alone? But under the heart there was a child, a boy, as the ultrasound showed. And she could not refuse him after all. She had dreamed of becoming a mother for so long. At some point, in order not to lose her house, Charlotte turned to a lawyer. She told her story without going into too emotional detail, but fully enough to make it clear that the child was conceived in marriage, but Peter was not the father, as confirmed by medical certificates. Jake is the real father, and she wants to arrange child support if he evades. The lawyer nodded, sighing. It's a difficult case, but the law, on the whole, is on your side. The biological father must be held accountable. We will file a claim and file a lawsuit if he refuses to recognize the child voluntarily. Charlotte winced. The prospect of litigation scared her, but she understood that there was no other way. It will be extremely difficult to raise a child alone. First, she decided to try talking to Jake again. He continued to avoid her. She did not return to the office, and at home, every movement of the baby reminded her that there was less and less time left. Several more weeks passed. Spring came, the trees bloomed on the streets, but Charlotte's soul remained sad. One day, she went out into the yard to mow the lawn and distract herself when she suddenly heard the familiar hum of a motor. On the road in front of the house, Peter's pickup slowly pulled over. Charlotte shuddered. He had not appeared since he took the things. Has he really returned? My heart skipped a beat. But Peter didn't get out of the car. He just looked at the house, then at her, and drove on. They locked eyes for a moment, and she saw pain and coldness in his eyes, as if he wanted to make sure she didn't need his help. And he left. In the last month of pregnancy, Charlotte began having false contractions. She felt unwell. Her stomach was tight. Her lower back was aching. There were a couple of weeks left until the terminal date. At night, when the pain became stronger, she called an ambulance and went to the maternity hospital, thinking that labor had begun prematurely. However, the doctors reassured her, saying that these were just harbingers, and returned her home, advising calm and rest. But there was no peace in her life for a long time. By that time, the lawyer said, "We have collected enough information to file a formal claim against Jake Reynolds for recognition of paternity and collection of child support. In court, they will conduct a DNA test if necessary." Charlotte was nervous, but understood that this was the only way out. She signed the documents, feeling like everything inside was trembling at the thought that she would have to meet Jake again in the courtroom or at the examination. The trial began while she was in her final weeks. Neither Jake nor his lawyer showed up for the first hearing, delaying the case. But the summonses were sent again. All this time, Charlotte went to a consultation and held on with all her strength. It was hard on her soul. In fact, she was alone, without moral support, in a state of forced struggle. Finally, one day in May, when the trees were in new foliage, she began to have real contractions almost a week ahead of schedule. At night, she was awakened by a sharp wave of pain in her lower back and stomach. Having difficulty getting out of bed, she felt her knees buckle. Fortunately, the phone was on the bedside table. She managed to call an ambulance, and then, gasping, she leaned against the wall so as not to fall. The brigade arrived quickly. On the way to the maternity hospital, Charlotte tried to breathe correctly, but the tears flowed naturally. She wanted someone close to her who would take her hand and say, "Everything will be fine." But there was no one. A pang of pain in her heart from the knowledge that Peter, whom she loved, would not come. And Jake, there's nothing to say about him. The birth was difficult. The boy was born at dawn, with a loud cry, with which he immediately announced himself to the world. When the midwife laid him on his mother's chest, Charlotte burst into tears. A warm, small body pressed against her, trusting her unconditionally. "Here he is, my son," she whispered. At that second, all worries went away for a moment, drowned by a wave of maternal love. She thought, I must," and stroked his tiny head. In the ward where she was transferred after giving birth, she had to experience the most contradictory feelings. Immense love for her son and bitterness because this life was born in an atmosphere of scandal and loneliness. The boy was named Jason. That's what Charlotte wanted. The name Jason was reminiscent of the name Jake, but she didn't consciously associate the two. Rather, she was attracted by the sonority. Maybe, subconsciously, she thought that this child would still have a part of the one who gave him life. A couple of days later, when she was already preparing for discharge, Lisa looked into the ward. The friend looked embarrassed, but was holding a bouquet of yellow chrysanthemums in her hands. "Hello," she said quietly. "I couldn't help but come." "Congratulations." Charlotte, sitting on the bed with the child in her arms, smiled faintly. "Thank you, Lisa. Forgive me for not being myself all these months." Lisa carefully sat down next to her. "Come on, I understand. How is he?" She nodded at the child, who was quietly snoring, curled up at his mother's chest. "He's a big guy, he weighs 300, Charlotte answered with a note of pride. "She eats well, but cries often. I'm learning everything as I go." "Well, that's normal. Everyone learns to be parents through practice," Lisa encouraged and looked out the window, frowning slightly. "Listen, Jake, he somehow." Charlotte lowered her eyes. "No, he wasn't there. He didn't even call, and I'm sure he won't call. But my lawyer says we can demand alimony. I have already submitted the documents. The child has appeared, and now, according to the law, he is obliged." Lisa nodded, looking at the boy. "Yes, that's right. You won't be able to do it on your own. And Peter." "I don't want to talk about Peter." Charlotte swallowed the lump in her throat. "He will never forgive me." "I heard that he asked some of his friends how you were," Lisa said quietly. "He's worried, Charlotte. But perhaps his pride is stronger. And it's true. The child is not his." Charlotte bit her lip to keep from crying. Inside, she felt that all the words about Peter were only opening an old wound. She hugged her son, trying to focus on him. "I have Jason," she thought. "Now the whole point is in him, and I will do everything to make him happy, even if I'm alone." She was discharged on the third day. It turned out to be hard at home without help. Breastfeeding, sleepless nights, taking care of everyday life, everything fell on her shoulders. Sometimes she called the nurse for a couple of hours so she could get some sleep herself. A lot of money was spent. Savings were melting. She hoped child support from Jake would help. But the trial had not yet taken place. They were waiting for summonses. Jake avoided it. Eventually, the question of a DNA test came up. When the subpoena reached Jake, he nevertheless contacted Charlotte by phone for the first time in many months. There was irritated fatigue in his voice. "Well, have you decided to bring everything to the end?" "I have no choice, Jake," she answered, trying not to raise her voice so as not to disturb the baby who was sleeping next to her. "You are a father, and I cannot support my son alone. I need your support." He remained silent, then said, "Okay, I will pass this test. But don't think that I will babysit your child." "Yours?" she asked bitterly. "He's yours too." But the interlocutor had already hung up. A couple of weeks later, a date was set for genetic testing. Charlotte, holding the baby in her arms, arrived at the laboratory. Jake appeared, frowning despite her, and quickly handed over the samples. The boy, feeling the tension, began to cry. Jake didn't even glance in his direction. Charlotte found herself desperately wanting to burst into tears when she saw this cold indifference. But she pulled herself together. "For the sake of my son, I will go through this." The results came quite quickly, a 99.9% match. Jake is the biological father. After that, everything moved to the judicial level. Charlotte filed documents to establish paternity and child support. The trial turned out to be a formality. As soon as the analysis confirmed paternity, the judge ruled that Jake was obliged to pay a certain amount monthly. He tried to object, asked to reduce the amount of alimony, and argued that the child was not planned. The judge just shook his head. "If this is your child, you are financially responsible for him." So Charlotte left the courthouse with a decision in favor of her and the baby. In the nightmare of recent months, this was a small ray of hope. Now at least there will be funds to support his son. She understood that Jake was unlikely to give her father's love and care, but at least financial support would allow her not to remain in debt. Soon money began to flow into her account. Not immediately, with delays, but do it. Looks like Jake's lawyer convinced him that playing with the law is dangerous. However, he himself did not call, did not come, did not write a word. Charlotte started a separate notebook where she wrote down all the expenses for the child. Sometimes she asked herself, is this exactly what I wanted? Mechanical transfer of money without paternal affection. But she understood that she could only blame herself for this, and also the circumstances that brought her to despair. She often recalled how she used to dream of filling the house with children's cries and sharing the joy of parenthood with a loving husband. Now she was a single mother with only her friend Lisa, who dropped by from time to time with bags of food and smiling advice. Charlotte sometimes called her parents, who lived in another state, but could not ask them to come. They had their own health problems. I chose this path myself, she repeated to herself, sitting by her son's crib. He began to gurgle and frown funny on his forehead when he wanted to eat. Sometimes Charlotte affectionately called him Jay, not forgetting that this name was a reminder of who the father was. But at the same time, she felt, the child is a separate person, and she loves him infinitely, regardless of how he was conceived. Peter woke up on an old sofa in a small rented house on the outskirts of the city. Almost a year has passed since the divorce. During this time, he managed to get a job in a small construction company, where he renovated houses and apartments. At first, he lived in Joe's trailer, but soon felt that he needed privacy and consistency. Through friends, I found a small house for rent. 2 rooms, a modest kitchen, a tiny courtyard. The owners did not ask for a lot of money, and Peter accepted this offer. A new day was beginning outside the window. He stood up, pulled on jeans and a t-shirt, and felt the warm summer breeze touch his face through the slightly open window. Having tidied himself up a little, he went out onto the porch, where he usually drank his morning coffee. The silence and spaciousness of the sky, all this became part of his new life, which no longer seemed as joyless as in the first months after the divorce. Work helped him get distracted. He took shifts, participated in various projects, sometimes leading a team of 3 people. Thanks to his perseverance and ability to work conscientiously, Peter gained the respect of his colleagues. He spoke little on personal topics. No one knew the details of his past, except for Joe, who also worked in this company, but in a different location. Peter learned to keep the pain inside and not share it left and right. Sometimes, especially in the evenings, memories of Charlotte still came flooding back. How she would run around the house, laughing, calling him for breakfast, how they would put up a Christmas tree during the Christmas holidays. But time, as Joe rightly said, did heal little by little. Peter did not seek meetings with Charlotte, but knew from mutual acquaintances that she gave birth to a boy, received alimony from Jake, and lives in their common house. He tried to figure out if he felt anger, regret, or something else towards her. Perhaps there remains a tired sadness mixed with an unclear warmth. It was like remembering a person who was once close, but now a stranger. One day, Peter received an order to renovate the living room in a house located in the old area of the city. When he arrived and saw the address, everything went cold inside him. It was an area adjacent to where Charlotte lived. However, he knew that her street was a little further away, so he probably wouldn't have to collide. As the crew unloaded the tools, Peter wondered, what if we run into each other at the store? This thought gave him mixed feelings. He was not sure whether he was ready for such a meeting. At a site where it was necessary to change the floor, glue wallpaper, and paint walls, Peter got down to business with enthusiasm. It turns out that when he concentrated on work, his hands and brain were completely absorbed in the process, and the memories receded. In the evening, already tired, he climbed into his pickup truck and drove home, where it was quiet and there was no need to talk to anyone. He began to appreciate this silence. One such evening, when Peter was returning from work, he was stopped by a street vendor. He sold watermelons directly from his truck, shouting about the freshness and sweetness of the goods. Peter, without understanding why, suddenly decided to buy a watermelon. Perhaps he wanted to remember the carefree summer days. Returning home, he hardly dragged the large fruit into the kitchen, cut it, and ate one slice. The taste was pleasant, but loneliness echoed in my head. Earlier they ate watermelons together, cheerfully making fun of each other. He even briefly imagined Charlotte laughing as the juice splashed onto his shirt. Damn, he thought, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. I don't want to plunge into these memories again. The next day, Joe stopped by at work. Hello, how is life? I heard you're going through a big renovation. Yes, the client wants a redevelopment, Peter answered, putting the tape measure aside. Are you testing me? Joe grinned. No, I just stopped by. Listen, someone at our company said that your site is being completed. Maybe after this, they will give you a more serious project. Peter was not against a more serious project. He had long proven that he could organize work, but so far management was afraid to promote him. Perhaps because of the modesty of Peter, who did not get into trouble. But be that as it may, he had a small dream to someday open his own repair and construction company, even if it was a very tiny one. He saved money and sometimes consulted Joe. We'll see, was all Peter said. I'm doing well so far. Joe tried not to ask about personal matters, and rightly so. Peter was not yet ready for a new relationship. He didn't even try to get to know someone the mental wound had not fully healed. There were evenings when he felt acute melancholy and asked himself if he would ever find a family. But looking at the medical report, which was still lying in the desk drawer, he realized that, most likely, he would not become a father in the biological sense. And adoption is a difficult issue for a single man without a stable life. At that time, Charlotte's life also entered a new rut. Son Jason is 8 months old. He had already learned to sit, slowly crawled on the carpet, and walked in his childish manner. Charlotte, having left Trio Industries, switched to a more flexible job in a small recruitment agency where she was allowed to work remotely. She began to receive less money than before, but alimony saved the situation. Of course, I wanted to return to an active career, but with a small son, it was difficult, and hiring a permanent nanny was expensive. Sometimes in the evenings, she took the stroller out into the yard, where she and her son breathed fresh air. The house still reminded me of St. Petersburg, the same walls, the same furniture. But Charlotte made a rearrangement and repainted the walls in the nursery, which she had never dared to decorate before. Now there was a crib, a cabinet with toys. Everything was decorated in pastel colors. Every corner of the room screamed that there was a child in the house. She hardly thought about Jake. From time to time, she saw money in the account that he transferred, and this was enough to feed the baby. He himself showed no desire to communicate with his son. Once in all these months he called, inquired about the child's health, and said that he was not ready to come yet. Charlotte replied that she would not force her, but each time she became convinced that it was better this way than torturing herself with illusions. The phone rang several times in the house, and when she heard an unfamiliar number, she thought it was Peter, who had suddenly decided to ask about her. But every time it turned out that it was either an advertisement or Lisa from a new number. And yet, in the back of her mind, she sometimes imagined talking to Peter, asking for forgiveness. She knew that he would not forgive, and she herself felt that his pride and his pain were too strong. At the same time, her confidence grew stronger that Jason should grow up in an atmosphere of love. And even if there is no father, she will do everything to give him a good future. Sometimes I sat in the nursery for a long time, watched my son play with a plastic cube, and thought, I finally did it. I became a mother. So another year passed. Peter worked, gradually rose in position, and saved money. Charlotte sold the house and moved to a cheaper apartment closer to the center, where it was more convenient to get to work and kindergarten when the time came to send her son away for a few hours a week. Jake continued to regularly pay child support, but nothing else changed in the child's life. Jason grew up healthy, had already begun to walk, babbled his first words, stubbornly repeating, "Mama," and sometimes it seemed like he was trying to say something like, "Yes, yes." Charlotte lived a modest but stable life, and by this time had recovered psychologically from the shock, although the shadow of guilt towards Peter sometimes returned to her in her dreams. They both moved forward without meeting, without calling each other. Time smoothed out the scars. 10 years later, Peter stood on the porch of his own house, not the tiny one he had once rented, but a quite impressive cottage built according to his own design. Over the past years, he managed to fulfill his dream. He opened the construction company Brooks Constructions, which specialized in high-quality repairs and construction of individual houses. I started with small objects, but gradually recruited a team of professionals, established contacts, acquired a reputation as a reliable person, and the business took off. He was now over 40, but he looked fit and confident. The hair thinned a little at the temples, wrinkles appeared in the corners of the eyes. He was still alone. In the years after the divorce, he had short relationships, but none developed into anything serious. Whether it was the fear of facing betrayal again or being busy with work, Peter himself did not know. Perhaps it was a mixture of everything. He learned to live alone, which did not prevent him from being successful in his career. In rare moments of rest, looking at the spacious rooms of his modern house, he sometimes thought, what if children's laughter could be heard in these rooms? But he quickly drove away this thought. He had long accepted that he would not be able to have his own biological children, but he did not come to the idea of adoption. Maybe someday, but the years passed, and he felt that it was too late. One autumn day, exactly 10 years after the day Charlotte announced her pregnancy, Peter went downtown on business. It was necessary to submit documents to the administration for a new project. After meeting with the official, he went out into the wide street, where the wind was dragging yellow leaves, and felt a sudden desire to drink coffee. I noticed a small cafe around the corner. I went inside, where it smelled of fresh baked goods and chocolate. A woman with red hair stood behind the counter and smiled at the customers. Peter didn't know her, but for some reason he felt that the atmosphere was friendly. He ordered a cappuccino, sat down at a table by the window, and began checking his email on his tablet. At that moment, two people entered the cafe, a woman and a boy of 9 or 10 years old. Peter automatically raised his eyes and his heart skipped a beat. It was Charlotte. She looked older. Her hair was a little longer than he remembered, her face more graceful. She was wearing a light coat with a gray turtleneck peeking out from underneath. The boy was tall for his age, with dark hair and a serious look. At first, Peter simply froze in surprise as he watched them walk towards the cake display. He thought, this must be her son. He's already about 10. The boy resembled Charlotte in facial features, but his father, Jake, could also be seen in him. A slightly elongated eye shape, a jawline. Charlotte didn't notice Peter right away, focused on her conversation with the child. But then the boy asked something, pointing to the tables. She turned around and met Peter's gaze. Shock reflected in her eyes. Her lips parted, she almost dropped her bag. They looked at each other for several seconds, unable to utter a word. Peter felt his insides tighten. He wanted to get up and leave, but his legs wouldn't obey. Charlotte took the boy by the shoulder, said something quietly, and they approached the table. The boy looked at Peter with curiosity and misunderstanding. Peter himself stood up and nodded hesitantly. Charlotte, hello. Hello, she answered quietly. So many years have passed. Her gaze darted from him to her son, and there was frank awe in her voice. The boy examined the stranger carefully. Hello, Peter repeated. Is this your son? He understood that the question sounded stupid. Of course, this is her son. But he needed to say something. Yes, Charlotte confirmed, looking at the boy with tenderness. His name is Jason. He's 10. We come here often. He loves baking. Peter looked down at the child. He smiled timidly. Peter had a storm inside. He felt both pain and interest. This is the same boy who became the cause of our breakup, it sounded in his head. Or, more precisely, the result, how he grew up. Jason, Peter said quietly, nice to meet you. The boy nodded. Hello. Mom, do you know this man? Charlotte put her hand on his shoulder. Yes, Jay. This is an old friend of mine. There was awkwardness in the voice. Peter tried to smile, but the smile came out hesitant. He didn't know what to say, but he understood that he needed to somehow smooth out the situation. I was just drinking coffee and noticed you by chance, he explained. Many years have passed. How are you? Charlotte closed her eyes for a moment, then quietly answered, I'm fine. I'm working, raising Jason. He is smart. He became an excellent student. And you? I heard that you have your own company, right? Congratulations. She tried to speak calmly, but there was moisture in her eyes. The boy, meanwhile, was distracted by the display case, apparently bored by the incomprehensible conversation of the adults. Thank you. Peter looked around, searching for words. I haven't heard anything about you either, except that you left our house. Yes, I had to sell, Charlotte explained with slight sadness. It was difficult for me alone, and there were too many memories. Peter understood. He felt a strong desire to ask 1,000 questions. How her life was, how she lived all these years, but the boy was standing next to him, and the situation was too awkward. Finally, he suggested, Can you sit down? I offer coffee or cocoa. Charlotte hesitated, but when she saw her son impatiently asking for a cake, she nodded. They ordered, and within minutes there were 3 cups at their table, a cappuccino for Peter, a latte for Charlotte, and a cocoa and brownie for Jason. The boy began to curiously lick the sweet icing, furtively looking at Peter. He smiled. Nice guy, and he seems to have been well brought up. The conversation began cautiously about mutual acquaintances. Charlotte reported that Lisa moved to another state, got married, and has 2 children. Peter said that Joe still works at construction and sometimes comes to his office. Jason kept inserting funny remarks. He is interested in robotics and plays basketball. As the conversation progressed, Peter noticed that the boy was really smart and friendly. Strange, he thought. I was expecting something completely different, but he's not to blame for anything. In about 20 minutes, they managed to discuss a lot of trifles. When the cups were empty, Charlotte said, We have to go. Jason, say thank you and say goodbye. Thank you, the boy exclaimed, smiling at Peter again. It was nice to meet you, Peter said sincerely, and there was a note in his voice that he did not expect from himself. Sympathetic, gentle. Charlotte stood up. The boy had already put on his jacket. Before leaving, the woman looked at Peter for a long time. Thanks for the treat, and sorry about everything. He felt an ache in his chest, but he restrained himself. He simply nodded. It's all in the past, Charlotte. May everything be fine with you. She smiled, and in this smile there was bitterness, but also relief. Then they left the cafe the boy skipped. She was a little slower. Peter was left sitting alone at the table. It seemed to him that several minutes had passed, but in reality it was probably almost half an hour. He touched the cup, which had long since run out of coffee, mentally recalling the conversation and Charlotte's farewell smile. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.